allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Bill is SB 99 and
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senator David Waters, District 4, to introduce Senate Bill 99 on regional career and technical education agreements. This bill will facilitate the ability of students in our state who want to take CTE to be able to access programs. I would like to start by way of a little bit of background and to note that really for about 12 years now, Representative Ladd and Department of Education, and particularly the last few years with Commissioner Edelblum, we've been working very hard to make sure that there's increased access for career and technical education. This has taken a lot of forms. It's involved making sure that we have sufficient funding in a tuition and transportation agreement so that the sending school students can get to the receiving schools and there are sufficient seats for them as well. We have tried to strengthen the relationship between CTEs through sector partnerships in area businesses. We have created a tax credit program so businesses can donate equipment and employee time and provide internships for CTE students. We've started new programs in marine trades and always the focus really has been to make sure that students who want to participate can participate. One big issue that we worked on about 4 years ago now was these regional agreements, which have existed for a long time in terms of the agreement that governs sending schools and receiving schools. So if you don't have your own CTE, you have a relationship with a school a high school that has one, and that's where your students can go. But we saw that there are a lot of scheduling difficulties, that some schools would start a week later than other schools or have their teacher days or this or that. And it meant that students from sending schools and receiving schools, if their schedules were out of whack, they were missing a lot of days. So we used those agreements to make sure that schedules came into conformity. That's a process over several years that's working very well. It seemed to me that one real missing piece here was whether or not students could get to the receiving school and take the full hours in their career and technical education program while still satisfying their requirements at their home school, that they have to do their required curriculum. And we had students who couldn't get there in time or they'd have to leave an hour early to get back to their sending school. And the other issue about that was whether or not there were going to be enough seats and how they're being apportioned out, and whether or not sending schools felt that they could support sending the students to those schools. And it seemed to me this was just wrong. So I worked extensively over the summer with Commissioner Edelblum, and we came up with a way, I think, to really allow student choice into the program for CTE. And so if you'll see, I'll walk through the bill and explain the kinds of commitments that the bill will make. First off, you see the bold on lines 8 through 10, which says that sending school students are not second-class students, that they have the right to have an equal basis for admission to programs in the receiving schools. So just because you're from another town doesn't mean you can't get into the automotive program. The main part of the bill starts on line 22 on page 1 and goes over to page 2. And what this sets up is a process whereby a student from a sending school can have a variety of options when it comes to the courses that they take at the receiving school. We did a lot of work, particularly Representative Ladd's impetus, to make sure that there were embedded credits for math, say, that could be counted against the overall requirements for some math components of the required curriculum within the CTE programs as appropriate. But what this says is that if you want, you can actually take those courses that you need at your receiving school. If you take up to 3 of them, you're a part-time student, or you could take more and make the receiving school your full-time school where you do all of your curriculum. This will take care of scheduling program problems, and it will provide the freedom of students to have the choice that they want about where they're going to get their education and how they're going to get it. So that is what is set up as a kind of a formula, and it says to the schools, you negotiate this, find a way to make it work through your regional agreements, come together, figure out, how many students you can handle, what courses, how you make sure there are enough seats in the math class or the science class, the English class, whatever they want to take. And of course, some students are going to want to go back to their home school for sports or whatever, and they can still do that. I think the other, and then there's the formula that kind of references existing formula about how we pay for tuition and transportation, and really that's the way we're doing things already for that. The other major concern I had in this bill is I want to make sure that all of our homeschoolers and all of our students who are going to non-public schools have the right and the access that they need for career and technical education. Now, legally, of course, they do. A lot of homeschoolers do CTE, and folks who go to charter schools have, of course, come and do CTE. And my particular concern, though, was about the non-public schools. I mean, for example, in Dover, in Somerset, we've got Portsmouth Christian Academy. It's in Dover. We've got Tri-City up in Dover. We've got St. Thomas there. And there may be students who come from towns that are not part of the sending school for the Dover CTE. Well, there's no way that they could go back to Portsmouth or back to wherever they are, the transportation, to take the CTE at supposedly their appropriate home or receiving school. So I said, no, you should be able to go to the closest CTE. Certainly that, I know that there are some students actually from Dover who come all the way over to Concord or go to Manchester for non-public school. And if they want to take CTE, well, they should be able to go to Manchester or Concord. So I think that's awfully important as well, to make sure that all of our students, whatever choices they're making, that they have a choice for CTE. That's the intent here. I think it's going to create a lot more freedom. I think it's going to help us with CTE. There's a lot of good news around CTE in the state. The enrollments are good. A lot of what we've done to make it help students get into the workforce that we need, particularly in crucial areas, is working very well. And I think we've always seen that there's been a bottleneck to make sure that the students from sending schools in particular can actually make it work to do a CTE program and get the courses they need. We do have from the Department of Education here, and again, I just want to end by particularly thanking Commissioner Adelblue. We did a lot of work together on this, and I think we have a good bill here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Any questions from the committee members? Any questions? Negative. No questions? You've done a terrific job.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we'll see, I have to get back over to energy, but if there are questions that come up in further testimony that I need to address, please
I
just let me know.
don't have anybody signed up to speak to this. Is there anybody who forgot to sign up? Anybody here wants to speak on SB 99? If not,
Okay, thank you.
we're all done with hearing on 99. The next one is SB 100. What? Oh, I see. Okay.
all.
We're actually ahead of ourselves. Okay, you have a 5
They never
minute
go that
recess.
fast.
5 minute recess.
That's how you know it's a really good book.
They don't want to speak, okay.
Amendment will be over by 10. That amendment will be over here by 10.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Senator Tim Lang from District 2, covering the Lakes region north up to Campton and Thornton. This bill came on the heels of a lawsuit. As you know, we passed this law, what's referred to as the CRT law or the anti-discrimination law. A couple terms ago, it went to court, and there was a court decision that came out of it that basically said Section 4 of this bill was ambiguous and needed to be clarified. So originally, I put a bill in to strike Section 4. However, I've been working with the Department of Education, and I think we're going to be coming up. I'll have language for you that'll be better rather than just striking the prohibition, which was upheld by the court as being ambiguous and needed better clarification. We're working on actually clarifying the law. I just don't have that amendment here, and I'm still working with the agency. So I'd ask that you just hold the bill, and I'll bring the amendment in. I was supposed to have it yesterday at 4 o'clock, and I didn't get it. So I anticipate I'll have it sometime today, and I'll submit it to OLS, and it'll be distributed to the committee. Make it kind of quick. So thank you.
Well, good morning. Welcome, Senator Ward. We are opening the hearing for Senate Bill 102FN, and welcome to present your bill.
Thank you very much. The intent of this bill is to make informational material available about type 1 diabetes in the schools, and primarily will be so that families, parents, and the staff have an understanding of what to watch for if they see a child with some of these symptoms. Type 1 diabetes is usually happens in young children, but there are occasions where an adult has developed it, depending on an overwhelming viral infection. They have been able to have no cases where they have developed type 1 diabetes, but mostly it happens in young children. And that's why it is so important to have the staff and the parents understanding what to watch for. And this is what this bill is doing. I think for me, it's very exciting that there actually now is a blood test that you can use to decide who might be vulnerable to develop type 1 diabetes before the typical symptoms develop, because sometimes they develop pretty fast and there's an emergency. So it's nice to know if they have the propensity for developing type 1 diabetes before it actually happens. And then you can be on the watch and you watch it. There are a lot of states that have this information available. For example, California, Georgia, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Illinois already have this in the schools, so they're aware of what to watch for. In New Hampshire, New Hampshire ranks 8th in the nation for the highest prevalence of type 1 diabetes among individuals under 19, according to recent CDC data. So that's why it's very important that we understand what it looks like, who is vulnerable, and this is what this bill is doing. It will be put up hopefully on the DOE website. Parents can go in there and there will be link to find out more information. I'm excited about it because in my former life, I was a diabetes management educator, so I have a lot of interest in preventing type 1 diabetes and the complications from it. So I'm hoping that we look favorably on this bill, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions? Yes, Travis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for taking my question. Although I support this as it's written, is there any reason why, I know it's different, but why is type 2 diabetes not part of this?
Say that again, the last part of it.
Why is type 2 diabetes not included in
Well,
this?
type 2 diabetes it's much slower, and that usually happens in adults. And usually you have a familiar history if you have type 2 diabetes. Very few children, there are some children develop type 2 diabetes, and it's called MODY, maturity onset diabetes in the young. It's not as common, but I certainly think that anything about any kind in any one of the two kinds of diabetes you should be aware of. But type 1 is the quicker one, the scarier one, because you can get ketoacidosis so fast, and it really is an emergency situation, whereas type 2 sort of creeps up on you.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Senator Ward, for taking my question. So this is essentially beyond the subject matter of type 1 diabetes. This is a policy change in information that would be provided in collaboration with the Department of Health and Human Services through the New Hampshire Department of Education. So it would require the New Hampshire Department of Education to find a space or create the space to give this information, or create, from the way you have it here, create the links.
That's my
So,
understanding. Yes.
yeah, informational materials may be in the form of links to existing related resources. And then, I read your section the section 2, lines 15 through 21. And I agree that there is a public health interest in getting accurate medical information to parents, particularly when there are warning signs that you mentioned.
Right.
And if the state of New Hampshire is going to create a policy of providing medical information on their Department of Education website, should we not include other public health issues and concerns that parents, if we're saying you should be on the lookout for type 1 diabetes issues, should we also not include things to look out for childhood leukemia? Because there's actually more of that than the type 1 diabetes. We have our vaccine schedule here on our Department of Education, but we don't have any like why you should, right? What to look out for. So would it not be a more comprehensive idea if we're going to open the door to providing medical watch lists, information, things to give parents a more comprehensive view of things to look for in the health of their children? Shouldn't we also include some of the other really, really important watch lists like mumps, rubella, pertussis, things that we're seeing a resurgence of, if we're going to create this, because it's a policy change?
You raised a very interesting question. I do not see the DOE being the repository for all medical information. If somebody has a question, they can just go in and look at it and say, oh, here is the link to find out more. I don't see the Department of Education is providing all kinds of medical information about all kinds of diseases that could possibly happen. I don't think that's the function of it. This is mostly to provide information, mostly to the schools, but you maybe find a link on the DOE website as well. But I think to hit the staff and the families and the schools is the most important part. They are the people who need to be aware of it. And hopefully, if they see something, they will check with their physician or their clinic, wherever they go.
May I follow up?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I think you're referring to line 4, and in consultation with the Department of Health and Human Services, shall develop or identify existing information on materials on type 1 diabetes. So in that space, would you be open, since we are changing a policy, the Department of Education does not include links to the Department of Health and Human Services and does not provide information about one particular childhood disease or any childhood diseases. And if we're going to start doing that, perhaps those links should be more comprehensive and not just focused on one childhood disease. There are other childhood diseases for which it's really important for parents to have that information. Would you be open to an amendment that would allow for that cross link to Health and Human Services with other childhood diseases on that list? Not just type 1 diabetes, like keep that there, but add in some of the other highlighted issues for parents to look out for.
You have a valid point, and I think that we need to check with somebody from the DOE and the Health and Human Services to see how they can coordinate, if they want to coordinate. So,
Thank you, Senator. Are you aware that there's an Office of Health and Wellness for the Department of Education?
am I aware of what?
There is an office within the Department of Education, the Bureau of Student Wellness and Nutrition, where this could easily be adapted to, that does have other links that take you outside of the Department of Education for health and nutrition, and it could just be part of that.
Okay, good.
Right, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Next, could I please have You took my list. Pam DiNapoli.
Just like you did, we can clean it at the end of this. And let's do it when we do it.
Okay.
So I just see where I can maybe tie some of this together. Okay.
Hi.
Good
Ready?
morning.
Morning.
Yes.
Good morning, Chairperson Ward. Thank you for sponsoring this bill. Vice Chair Sullivan and members of the said Education Committee. My name is Pam DiNapoli, and I'm a school nurse in the Manchester School District and represent the New Hampshire School Nurses Association as chair of their Legislative Action Committee. I'm testifying today to offer our strong support for SB 102 relative to making informational materials regarding type 1 diabetes available on the Department of Education website. School nurses play a critical role in preventative and screening services, health education, and assistance with decision-making about health for children, adolescents, and their families. The school nurse uses best evidence to provide these services. Type 1 diabetes in children and adolescents is on the rise here in New Hampshire and nationally. According to the CDC Diabetes Statistics Report, more than 18,000 young people have type 1 diabetes, and the number of young people newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes per year was 20 per 100,000. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where the pancreas fails to produce insulin, leading to high blood sugar levels. Lifelong management includes insulin therapy, blood sugar monitoring, healthy eating, and regular exercise. Type 1 diabetes is not preventable, but it can be successfully treated with early diagnosis and treatment. Both are essential for managing the disease and preventing complications. The classic symptoms of type 1 diabetes include increased thirst, frequent urination, extreme hunger, and weight loss. Education about these symptoms, coupled with close follow-up, has been shown to enable earlier diagnosis and prevention of ketoacidosis. DKA, as it is known, is a medical emergency and requires hospitalization and treatment. DKA is often the point at which children are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. In a report published by the American Diabetes Association in December 2023, the report cited advances in early detection and screening and supports the need for health professionals to be aware of these advances and increase communication with families related to early detection and management of the disease as a result of the fast pace of new discoveries for managing the disease. While again, type 1 diabetes is not preventable, with increased education and awareness, it may be possible to avoid crisis and expense, both physical and emotional, of medical emergencies as a result of the diagnosis. The New Hampshire School Nurses Association strongly supports SB 102FN and believe that evidence-based resources provided by the Department of Education and disseminated through schools is an ideal vehicle for communicating and managing education delivered to families for whom children may be at risk for type 1 diabetes.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
questions? Senator?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you. I received your email and
Oh, okay,
read this
good.
ahead of time. Thank you. I appreciated you sending that out early. And I think my questions are along the same lines. Representing the School Nurse Association, understanding that there would be this link to the Department of Health and Human Services. Do you think that it would be advantageous to expand the opportunities for information about public health concerns and childhood wellness to include other childhood diseases and health concerns?
Interesting, that was the first comment from the association when we brought up this bill.
Okay.
So the conversation was about why are we signaling out diabetes? Why aren't we coming up with other things? But we feel like this is a problem. There's a lot of, so sort of to the type 2 diabetes question, there's a lot of misinformation about type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And this is a good start. And certainly that's why we support the bill. But is there an opportunity to provide education? That's the school nurse's role. And I think right now there's so much information out there. So looking, these families get into crisis right away, and that's going to affect lifelong. So like you say, leukemia is too, but leukemia can be chronic and acute and done with. So this is a start, but yeah, there are definitely other childhood illnesses that would benefit from this same type of bill. And I don't know if you want to get into that every year, identifying a new disease that's going to go on, because every year there's new ones every year. So, I don't know how you'd want to handle that, but I think what you had said with links to DHHS and that information, because this bill, as Senator Ward said, the intent of this bill is just for us, which will probably fall to the school nurse, to provide information and links. And we're not going to be in the position of primary care of diagnosing and screening. We are providing information. So we see a kid who comes in who has frequent urination, a child who has previously been potty trained and loses that ability. That's a clue for us to say, maybe we should think about what's going on here. So there are opportunities for education. But that definitely was part of our conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Damon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee. I'm State Representative Hope Damon, Sullivan District 8, which is overlapping with Senator Ward, or she overlaps my district. And I also am a retired diabetes educator. I spent a very rewarding career as a dietitian, mostly in private practice, and worked with people with diabetes every day. So I won't repeat what has already been presented. I wanted to highlight that in addition to the bill potentially requiring DOE to have links to type 1 diabetes information on their website, it also requires school districts to make members of their community aware of that, which they can do simply by putting the link to DOE or the links from DOE to diabetes information on their websites. I would expand a little bit on the development of type 1 diabetes, because I think it's critically important to recognize there are no symptoms in the first 2 stages of the 3 stages in the development of type 1 diabetes. You simply don't know that your body is attacking, it's an autoimmune disease, body's attacking the cells that make insulin, and those cells are gradually dying off. So there's less and less insulin production. You can't live without insulin. You will ultimately die. So in stage 3, as the symptoms develop, the symptoms are frequent urination, sort of unmanageable thirst, constant thirst, fatigue unusual for the individual, not related to being overtired or overexercised or something like that, and a general sense of malaise. Very often, type 1 diabetes is not initially diagnosed when those symptoms occur because they're kind of flu-like symptoms, and people think their child's just under the weather. And by the time that the DKA develops, which is a metabolic condition where the blood is acidic, very acidic, it's not supposed to be, and it has high levels of a substance called ketones, that is affecting cognition. It can cause permanent damage, and it can lead the child to go into a coma. Somewhere right around 50% of kids diagnosed with type 1 diabetes are in DKA when they're diagnosed. They are literally in a life-threatening state that we could have prevented if we diagnosed sooner. So that really is the intent of this bill, is to help people be more alerted to the seriousness of those kind of symptoms, that we should not disregard them. To also acknowledge, as Senator Ward noted, there is now an autoantibody screening test that is valid in stage 2 of diabetes. So there could be a link to help people be aware of that and get advice to decide whether their child should be screened. And there is actually a medication that if you screen positive in stage 2 for kids 8 years old and above, it will decrease the onset of type 1 for about 2 years, which gives that family opportunity to learn when they're not in a critical situation, how to manage diabetes. And I won't take your time and read through it, but on my testimony, which I almost forgot to give you, I have a list on the back of the things that folks with diabetes need to learn. And I think you will appreciate it that it is an overwhelming amount of information to learn if your child is in intensive care and you need to learn this in order to take them home once they are stabilized from the DKA. It's a very hard circumstance to learn when you're so stressed and concerned and frankly exhausted. It'd be much better for folks to have the opportunity to learn that preemptively. I do want to respond to, I'm sorry, sir, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Is it Abbas? Senator Abbas's query about type 2. With respect to Senator Ward, I would weigh in differently. I'd love to see the bill amended to include type 2. 90% of people who have diabetes have type 2 diabetes, not type 1. And we have an increasing incidence of type 2 diabetes in teenagers. The sooner type 2 is diagnosed, the more effective we can be at helping those folks know how to manage it well and reduce the risk of lifetime complications. And the younger you are when you're diagnosed, the more likelihood of complications if it's not well addressed over time. So I do think it would have merit to include that. Let me just see. The last thing I would note is that diabetes is a multi-partisan, multi-everything illness. We're all eligible. It has no boundaries. So this is really for everybody. Happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Representative. I
morning.
appreciate you. I appreciate your background in this topic, and I don't think there's anybody in the room that does not take the issue of getting type 1 diabetes diagnosed as early as possible so that it can be treated. Seriously, I think we can all stipulate to that right out of the gate. So we understand the seriousness, genuinely understand the seriousness. This bill creates a new policy, though, that the Department of Education will provide information through it with a connection to the Department of Health and Human Services about one particular childhood disease. And in New Hampshire, we have more than one childhood disease. So this is possibly all the folks, the advocates, and there is a very robust advocacy organization of people getting information out about type 1 diabetes. Is this not maybe a good opportunity to create that kind of information portal, because that's what this is doing, is creating an information portal to include other childhood diseases that are here in New Hampshire that maybe don't have 7 or 8 different people to come in and advocate for early diagnosis or things to look out for. Could we not open that policy up to include others?
So the short answer is yes. And I would say, so I sit on the, House Education Funding Committee and was on the full House Ed Committee last year. When I first became aware of the possibility of this bill, the diabetes educator part of me was elated with the opportunity to get this information out through another avenue of communication. And a piece of me said, we already asked DOE to do so much. Is this their role? Does it fit there? And after some exploration and thought, my conclusion was, yes, this fits there, and this actually should be an opportunity to look at what belongs there for benefiting kids. I mean, school is where the majority of children families get information. So it is opportune. And maybe we have to decide what the criteria is for which conditions, which diagnoses would be communicated in that way. We're not asking DOE to become the Department of Health and Human Services, or at least I hope we're not. But I would agree with you that this is an opportunity to say what else would help kids be healthier. Unhealthy kids don't learn well. That's just a basic fundamental. Unfed kids don't learn well. So yes.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you all for your time and work.
Andrew Serrano. Welcome.
Good morning, respected and esteemed members of the committee. My name is Andrew Serrano. I sit before you as a dedicated member of the Dartmouth community and the Dartmouth Diabetes Link of class of 2027. But more importantly, I sit before you as an individual who has lived with type 1 diabetes for the last 17 years of my life. Diagnosed at just the age of 2 years old, my life was changed instantly. My parents went from raising a carefree toddler to managing a life-threatening condition, pricking my tiny hands and fingers with needles up to 7 times a day. Unlike teenagers who can express their symptoms, toddlers cannot. The warning signs, as everyone before me has mentioned, of excessive thirst, fatigue, and weight loss are easily mistaken for common illnesses, leading to delayed and often dangerous diagnosis. This bill is critical because it empowers parents, schools, and communities with the knowledge of type 1 diabetes to ensure that school districts are providing accessible, up-to-date information. Then we can prevent threatening emergencies to improve long care terms and outcomes within our children within our community. By passing today's bill, we're not just spreading awareness about type 1 diabetes and saving lives. This early recognition of type 1 diabetes means the difference between a manageable diagnosis and a life-threatening medical crisis. Let's make sure no child's first symptoms is their first medical emergency. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Very well done. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
I apologize in advance if I butcher this name. Costin? Oh, thank you.
You knew who you were.
I can see the eyes.
Not the first time it's happened. One of the first times it's been pronounced correctly, though, the first try. So, good morning, esteemed members of the committee. My name is Costin Autry, and I am a member of the class of 2028 at Dartmouth College. I am a founder and co-president of the Dartmouth Diabetes Link, and I'm here today on behalf of the Diabetes Leadership Council to represent the thousands of diabetics that live within New Hampshire. Here is my story. On my 8th grade summer, a series of changes fundamentally redefined my identity. I was constantly drinking water, yet I was always thirsty. I was constantly eating food, yet within the span of a month, I lost over 20 pounds. I could see each rib protrude through my chest. I was also constantly tired. At one point, I slept for 2 straight days, and that's when my parents noticed something. On the drive to the ER, I remember drifting in and out of consciousness, and I thought, why can't the pain stop? And when the ER received me, they determined that I was in a dangerous state and called diabetic ketoacidosis, as you've heard remarked on in speeches prior to mine. A couple of days later, I developed type 1 diabetes. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah.
And a therapy of insulin and carb counting redefined my life. I share a story that's familiar to millions of Americans. Some unfortunately don't make it and pass away before the diagnosis of diabetes can be confirmed. This bill empowers parents through education to learn about the signs of diabetes before it develops, reducing the mental and physical toll that this disease's onset can have. That makes New Hampshire a better place, which is why I and countless others are proud to support Bill SB 102 FN. Thank you, and I'm also open to questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you guys are just challenging me today. Kyriakis?
Kyriakis.
Kyriakis. I was close. Close. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, esteemed members of the Education Committee. My name is Kyriakis Papasavas, and I am also a founder and co-president of the Dartmouth Diabetes Link, representing the Diabetes Leadership Council to testify in support of SB 102. Type 1 diabetes is the second most common autoimmune disease in children and young adults. Unlike type 2 diabetes, it is not caused by lifestyle factors and cannot be prevented. The warning signs such as extreme thirst, frequent urination, sudden weight loss, and fatigue can be subtle and easily overlooked, leading to delayed diagnoses. I was very fortunate to have a physician as a father. During our vacation in the Dominican Republic, he recognized these symptoms, and after a quick blood test at the local clinic, he confirmed his suspicion. I was back in the United States the same day, beginning treatment before any serious complications could develop. Following my diagnosis, my younger brother was screened for autoantibodies, markers that can appear in siblings of children with type 1 diabetes before any symptoms appear. Unfortunately, like my friend Costin, 1 in 3 children with type 1 diabetes are not diagnosed until they experience life-threatening diabetic ketoacidosis. Most children do not have parents working in the medical field, underscoring the importance of informing them on the early signs of type 1 diabetes. This bill has the potential to raise awareness, increase the rate of early screening, and help prevent severe complications. Furthermore, early detection of type 1 diabetes gives patients the opportunity to enroll in clinical trials investigating and developing new therapies. Diabetes management is rapidly evolving with more accessible diagnostic tools, smarter insulin delivery systems, and stem cell treatments that will hopefully mitigate the need for insulin therapy. The earlier we catch type 1 diabetes, the better the outcomes for children and families. Senator Ward, I applaud you for your work and leadership in this important legislation. I'd also like to thank Senator Abbas and Senator, how's your name? Altschiller, for your valuable input as we were discussing this important legislation. I definitely agree that we should include type 2 diabetes in this, as 90% of diabetes cases are type 2. And I think Senator Abbas brought a really good point where many people, even at Dartmouth College, who are really highly educated, do not know the difference between type 1 and type 2. I think just by having this website and by disseminating this information in school districts, where, as mentioned, schools are the place of learning, people can be more educated in general about diabetes and the differences and the nuances between the two different types. And hopefully children that are being bullied about their diabetes that'll stop because their classmates will understand that this is an autoimmune disease and they'll have more background. Thank you everyone for your time. I urge you all to support SB 102 and protect the health and well-being of our students.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Prentice?
Thank you, Vice Chair Sullivan, and welcome. The team here from Dartmouth College,
Yes.
welcome. And you talked about the Dartmouth Diabetes Link.
Yes.
So rather than assume, just tell us a little bit about what this is.
So we are, Costin and I are freshmen at Dartmouth College, and we were quite frankly shocked. We saw many diabetics on campus, but it was not an organization representing them. So we partnered with the Diabetes Link. They're a national organization. We started a chapter through them. This is our first big advocacy project, but we also brought recently on campus the head endocrinologist at the HMC, Dr. Richard Comey. Unfortunately, he cannot join us today, but he is also in support of this legislation, and he came and spoke on campus about diabetes and the impact on people and different side effects. And this spring, we're also planning on fundraising for the HMC endocrinology through a 5K, and we hope to make that an annual tradition in Hanover, New Hampshire.
Excellent.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that your dad?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thought we had a doctor in the house. I had a question.
My dad is in Connecticut.
All right, thank you.
Thank
You
you.
gentlemen did a great job. Could I please have Peggy Balboni? Good morning, Representative.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Senate Education Committee. My name is Peggy Balboni, and I am representing Rockingham 38, the towns of Greenland, Northampton, and Rye, and I serve on the House Education Administration and Policy Committee as well. I am in support of SB 102, and it was wonderful hearing from these young men about their personal experiences. I'd like to give you another perspective as a parent. About 10 years ago, my son was in the spring of his senior year at boarding school. We saw him frequently and had noticed that he had begun to lose some weight. At the end of that April, I took him to attend a college acceptance program. He mentioned that he had not been feeling well, was extremely fatigued, and experiencing back pain. While on the trip, he was constantly thirsty and urinated frequently. Concerned, I encouraged him to come home with me so that I could get him to go see our doctor. But as it was the spring of his senior year, he was reluctant to miss his classes and social activities at school. So I agreed to let him return to school with the promise that he would go to Student Health Services should his condition worsen. 2 days later, I received a phone call from the school nurse. My son had gone to health services that morning as he was nauseous and vomiting. After learning of his other symptoms, she wisely checked his blood glucose level. It was well over 400. Healthy blood glucose levels are between 80 and 150. She wanted me to know that the school had sent him directly to Boston Children's Hospital, suspecting he was probably experiencing diabetic ketoacidosis. As you can imagine, I was shocked and immediately got into the car to drive to the hospital. My son was admitted, diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and spent 4 days recovering from his condition. As a parent, I agonized over what I could have done to prevent this emergency health crisis from happening. We have no history of diabetes in our family. My son was healthy, participated in sports, and had his annual exams with his doctor. Until just weeks before his admission, we had no clue of his impending condition. Unfortunately, I had failed to realize that the combination of his symptoms, sudden weight loss, excessive thirst, frequent urination, and fatigue, could indicate the onset of type 1 diabetes. I feel that Senate Bill 102 will ensure that all public school families will have access to educational resources that will help them recognize the risk factors and warning signs of diabetes, as well as the procedures for screening and interpreting test results. I am hopeful that giving this information, other families will be able to identify possible symptoms of diabetes, get medical assistance earlier, and be spared the trauma that we suffered as a family. As these young men have mentioned, managing diabetes has greatly changed our lives. Everyone in our family must be able to recognize the symptoms of both high and low glucose levels to help keep my son safe and prevent hospitalization for his condition. This legislation will help families better understand diabetes and what to do if they suspect their child might be exhibiting symptoms. And just one other thing, I in the conversations that happened, I agree that there are some other conditions, and this might be an opportunity that we see here to better inform parents. Because, as was mentioned, they spend a lot of time in school, and we see our kids too, but sometimes nurses or teachers might notice things that we're not seeing as well. So thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you, Representative. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak that have not yet? Seeing none, I'm closing the hearing for SB 102 FN.
So we'll go right ahead and hear our last bill here, which is SB 206. And Senator Rishardi will introduce the bill. Just hang on a second.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Denise Rishardi. I'm the state senator for District 9, representing 13 beautiful towns from Bedford to Hinsdale. Senate Bill 206 FN is requiring public schools to limit student cell phone use. I have been passionate about this issue and had wanted to introduce this 2 to 3 years ago. And until now, it really now has garnished a lot of support. This bill is a very proactive step toward improving educational outcomes and student well-being by requiring public schools to adopt clear policies limiting cell phone use during the school day. Research consistently shows that excessive smartphone use in schools contributes to distraction, reduced academic performance, increased social anxiety, and cyberbullying. By restricting personal device use during school hours, this bill will ensure that students remain engaged in their learning and develop healthier habits all around technology use. This legislation balances structure with flexibility by allowing exceptions for medical, disability, and language support needs. Additionally, it mandates collaboration with educators and parents, ensuring that policies reflect community needs. Schools will have the freedom to tailor policies to their specific circumstances, while students will benefit from less distraction, increased social interaction, and improved focus on learning. Senate Bill 206 is a common sense solution to a growing issue, ensuring that classrooms remain places of focused learning and personal development. And you may have heard that there are some House bills to ban cell phone. And if you would like me to speak to the differences between those in this bill, I would be happy to do that, or take any other questions.
I don't think you need to distinguish between them. Any questions?
I do.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you. I did read the House bill too. My concern with this bill is that the word prohibit, that doesn't give the school district the ability to actually control the use in the school. I know a lot of schools that don't have access, not all the kids have access to Chromebooks. They'll use their phones in the classroom with given teacher permission to research while they're in the classroom. And the other concern that I have by prohibiting them completely is that we have discovered some abuse in the classrooms by kids having their cell phones on them. And there's also, has been a safety device in some very traumatic situations for kids, some emergency situations. So the word prohibit, I find problemsome. I think it should be left up to the districts to make the decision as to how they want to guide the use of the phones. I know the intent is the bullying and the distraction, and I completely support that. But I think that there needs to be more room for the school district to actually control their policy.
Well, thank you for your comment. This bill will allow the schools the flexibility to wrap this around their own policies. I will say that this has also contributed to a lot of the issues we're having with mental health.
Follow up.
And I don't disagree with that. But where it says such policies shall prohibit personal devices with the exception of, I think that actually removes any control that the teachers have in the classroom if they have a reason for the kids to use it as a learning device. That's my concern.
Thank you for your concern.
Any other questions? I just want to mention something. I had attended the Excel and Ed conference, I guess a couple of months ago now, and there were quite a few companies that had different storage facilities for cell phones in classrooms. They're innovative ways of keeping the cell phones under lock when the class was actually in session. So there are a lot of companies looking into this and looking at least restrictive ways of doing it. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Barrett Christina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. Barrett Christina from the New Hampshire School Boards Association. We are in support of this bill. We think that the language, at least, we support the concept, I should say. Senator Sullivan, I believe you mentioned the two bills in House Education. Chairman Ladd's bill is House Bill 131. Representative Litchfield's bill is House Bill 781. Those two bills are exactly the same, except the fact that Representative Litchfield's bill has an allocation of $250,000 in there that she stated, I think, would be procured through the Department of Education for grants for school districts to apply for to buy the storage devices that you referenced, Madam Chair. We did notice the language, the prohibit language that was mentioned. We're not crazy about that. We believe that school boards should have some level of flexibility. Representative Ladd's bill does say that the use of the cell phone is limited during instructional time, but could be possibly used during lunch or recess or some other time when students are not on academic task, if you will. The other aspect we're not overly crazy about this bill on line 7, where it says the policy has to be reviewed and updated annually. That's fine. I mean, if you wanted to do that, I don't know if that necessarily needs to be put in law. The collaboration with the parents on the development of the policy absolutely makes sense. And why we're agreeable to that. So NHSBA has a sample policy first issued in 2006. And dating myself, when I wrote this, it was to prohibit pagers and beepers in the classroom. And then it was updated in 2010 to include cell phones. And the initial feedback was the pushback from parents saying that, you know, school, especially in the high school, a kid's schedule will change, a practice might get canceled, you know, and there's maybe one landline in the office and 30 kids are trying to call mom and dad and say, can you pick me up now? Or my practice is being pushed out until 7 o'clock or whatever the case may be. So, you know, I think getting the parental buy-in is going to be a challenge, which is why including the parents in the development of the policy, I think, is reasonable. And also, if we do have a law that puts some limitations on cell phone use during the school day, it's going to take some of the heat off the teacher or the school principal in trying to enforce it. I'm having those conversations with parents. The principal is going to say, look, we have a law that limits the cell phone use during certain times of the school day. So, and last, I like telling this story. I was at a conference in Providence, Rhode Island, at the end of September 2004, and they had a principal from a middle school in Providence that had just come off 2 years of a cell phone ban in their middle school. So they were starting to develop some data about the academic improvements with the cell phone. I don't want to call it a ban, but the restrictions. And he said in those 2 years, incidences of bullying went down, online, texting, social media. Because incidences of bullying went down, there were fewer physical altercations in the school district. Because there were fewer physical altercations in the school district, student attendance went up. Because student attendance went up, there was more time on task with the academics, and because there was more time on task with the academics, they were seeing a rise in student achievement and student performance. So with that, again, we support the concept. All 3 bills are different. I presume that whatever House Ed sends down here and whatever Senate Ed sends up there may be some working through the two committees. And NHSBA is happy to help with navigating some language or coming out with something, whatever either committee may be amenable to. So with that, I'll conclude my testimony.
Thank you very much. Senator Sullivan?
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Are there districts in New Hampshire that do not have policies around cell phone use?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. We develop sample policies that we send out to districts. We don't track what districts adopt which policies. We have a lot of policies that we categorize as optional. So if we send it out, we have no idea. I'm guessing that most high schools probably have a cell phone policy. And I should say, I don't want to throw a wrinkle into this, but our sample policy is titled Unauthorized Communication Devices, because we know that the technology advances, right? I cracked the joke about pagers and beepers 20 years ago. What the bill doesn't include, but NHSBA would probably include that in a recommended sample policy, would be smartwatches as well too. You can text. I don't own a smartwatch, but I understand you can text and make phone calls through it. So we'd have to find a way to address that as well too, which is why our sample policy is just broadly titled Unauthorized Communication Devices.
Thank you very much. Another one? Follow up?
Just on that topic, I think the difference there is I think kids use you can't take pictures with a
Gotcha.
smartwatch, right? And they use pictures that they abuse
Certainly.
their
Certainly.
Yeah.
That's an important distinction, and
Yeah.
at least in the bullying realm and other things we've heard in high schools the last 15 years or so.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I had seen an article that the kids in Finland, who usually did extremely well in school, their scores had gone down significantly when they started after the use of cell phones.
I believe it.
So that might be something to consider.
I mean, everybody in the room, and the first thing you look at when you wake up, and it's the last thing you look at before you go to bed. Parents are just as, I hate to use the word addicted to them, but many adults are glued to their phone all day long as well too. I mean, I was doing the same thing while the other hearings were going on. I'm checking my email and checking the news and everything else. So.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. You said that there's some sample policies out there, and I know my colleague mentioned that some of the parents, and I heard concerns from other parents about they want their children to have their phones on them in case there was an emergency.
Yeah.
Now, in the unfortunate circumstance where there is an emergency and the school is on lockdown, my response always has been, do you really want 20 or 30 students' phones all going off at once if you're trying to, not let your presence be known? So I'm asking if your sample policies addresses that.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. No, in contemplating these bills and talking about it sort of in our own office internally, that issue came up. Parents want to be able to contact their kids in the event there's an emergency, and the kid may be able to want to contact the parent in the event that there's an emergency, a text message or what have you. Our sample policy itself does not address that. The only sort of carve out, if you will, is for medical services, students with special education services that may need the phone to track whatever it might be. But we've contemplated that, but our sample policies don't specifically address that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deborah House.
Good morning, Senator Ward, Chairman Ward. My name is Deborah House. I am president of the American Federation of Teachers, New Hampshire, and I'm here in support of SB 206. I'll try not to repeat everything that's been said already, but we support this because we need to give our educators and students distraction-free learning time to focus on learning in the classroom. And with so many teens, middle schoolers, and even elementary schoolers carrying cell phones every day, the distraction is incredible. The current system isn't working. There are districts where the cell phone policy is essentially left up to the individual classroom teacher. And that is not a workable solution, because then you are putting all of the burden on the teacher to come up with a policy and enforce it. You're setting them up for a behavior management struggle, even a power struggle with a teenager or preteen who doesn't want to give up their phone. And as we know, these things are addictive. There are many preteens and teens who are so concerned about missing out on something that's going on their phone that they will engage in a battle of wills over whether they're going to check that message, look at that social media post to see who's replied to something. So leaving it up to the individual educator is putting a burden to try and control that distraction. And you multiply that by how many kids are in the class, how much learning time are you losing? I've got testimony here that I'll pass out, and there's links to some research, but a 2024 Pew Research study said nearly half of U.S. teens are on the internet almost constantly. That includes during school time, and most of that is through a smartphone. Most of the time they're on the internet, they are looking at social media, YouTube, or gaming. That's even during school time. Common Sense Media Research did a great report called Constant Companion, a Week in the Life of a Young Person's Smartphone Use. So they surveyed hundreds of teens about how they use their cell phones, found that the average teen receives 237 notifications on their cell phone every day. And at least a quarter of that is during school time. Each notification, and you may have noticed that when the young man got one while he was testifying, is a distraction. Again, Multiply that by how many kids you have in a classroom. Each one of them not only takes that student off task, but all the students around them and the teacher. Same study found that almost all students surveyed use their cell phones at school during the day, at least for a little bit. Some of them, the average is 43 minutes, and some of them up to 6 hours a day. More than 7 in 10 high school teachers say students being distracted by their cell phones in the classroom is a huge problem, is having an impact on learning, behavior, and the student's sense of well-being. It exacerbates inter-student conflict. It can inflame cyberbullying and other concerns like that. So we think that this bill even is a step, is the right approach to take, even though we might want to look at the word that says prohibit and give local districts a little more leeway to limit it. There should be exceptions for medical issues, obviously, and for language use. Research has shown that banning student cell phone use at school is one of the single but impactful ways to improve student educational outcomes, behavior, and well-being. So we're supporting this bill, and we hope that you will find it ought to pass.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. So Manchester, where I represent, already has an electronic procedures policy in place that prohibits use of them during academic time. The teachers are not able to actually enforce that. They're having a really hard time enforcing it. So my question is, how does this change the teacher's ability to actually enforce it? They should have control of their classroom, and if they tell a child to put the phone away, that should be it. But they're having trouble in controlling their own classrooms. So how does this actually solve that?
So I guess my question is, what happens if the teacher tells the student to put the phone away? What is the support for the teacher if the student disobeys? Because it should be a full team approach. If you have a student who is not following directions and you have, given them a verbal warning and they're still refusing to comply, do you have backup? Are there systems in place in your school to help you out? Because with classroom management, you do have to have somewhere for that student to go if they are defying your directions.
Well,
Yes.
Would you agree that this bill does not address that, and perhaps we need to put an amendment that talks about the administrator's role in this?
That's why I'm saying we need consistent district-wide policies. It cannot be on the individual classroom teacher, because when you're getting into what essentially is a battle of wills with an addicted student who is so concerned about what their peers are doing on social media that they can't resist looking at what that notification was, you've lost their attention, and their anxiety is climbing through the roof. And learning is not happening for that child, and maybe not for others in the classroom. Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
What do you know about the parents' involvement? Do you feel that the parents are very much behind this, not prohibition, but reduced use of cell phones?
So, I haven't done a lot of research on parents in general. Certainly we have heard from parents who think it would be a good idea to be able to limit it so students could focus on learning while they're at school. I've also heard from parents saying they wish they could limit it at home. I understand it's a struggle everywhere. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Brian Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Brian Hawkins, representing NEA New Hampshire. We are also in support of Senate Bill 206, requiring public schools to adopt policies to limit cell phones by students. We feel this is an important piece of legislation to help our students better learn and grow when they're at school. I will skip over a lot of the data that has been put forward, except to some specific data internally that we have. First, our the NEA National conducted a nationwide survey of its members about the impact of social media and personal devices on mental health. Just some of the main takeaways on that were over half of the members who responded say that phones are in the category of very disruptive, that social media is concerning and, as had been cited earlier, leads to cyberbullying, impedes social skill development, and disrupts instructional time. And 90% of them felt that student mental health overall is a serious issue, and it certainly contributes to that. The desire for action was the other major takeaway from that, which was wanting a school-wide policy with parent and educator collaboration. Overall, 90% supported a restriction on instructional time, and 83% supported during the entire school day. And as was stated earlier, not leaving these policies up to the individual educator in the individual classroom. So many school districts around the country and in New Hampshire have already taken some action to limit access to personal devices in school. One of the first ones to do it was to start this process was an executive order in Virginia from Governor Youngkin, who directed schools to do this. And as far as the information we have, at least 15 states have passed laws or enacted policies that ban or restrict students' use of cell phones in schools statewide. And 7 of the nation's 20 largest school districts forbid the use of cell phones during the school day. Considering the national results and the desire for action, NEA New Hampshire also conducted a survey of its local union leaders, asking questions about whether their district had a policy for cell phone use, and if they did have one, whether it made a positive impact on their school. We also asked if their district or school policy restrictions were designed for instructional time only or the entire school day or other relevant details. What we found from folks who responded was if their school, fairly consistently, if their school did not have a policy, they wanted one. So there are districts, at least from the responses we got, that don't have one. If their school district did have a cell phone restriction that applied to instructional time only, the preference was that it be extended to the entire school day. Some of that, I think, goes to the management of the whole policy to begin with. If it's, teacher to teacher, do you have the nice one who has some flexibility versus not? And so that's one aspect. The members who responded also said that their policy, the ones who said that their policy didn't make as much of a difference tended to be the ones that did not have a restriction on the entire school day. Because you can imagine, you get out of class, you're walking down the hallway with the device, you're in the lunchroom, and you're not talking to your friends. Nearly all the members who responded indicated that the restriction made a positive difference on the climate in the school and student learning. Anecdotally, I remember one of the responses being just from a middle school that overall the just climate in the building was calmer after they had been in this type of policy for some time. This was a full school day. So we think that SB 206 represents a minimum standard for school district policies that are backed up by some of the results that we found. It's a restriction on personal devices through the entire school day, bell to bell, basically, requiring that the implementation be uniformly and consistently school-wide. I think that partly goes to the question about, enforcement, and that, if there are exceptions being granted, it's not, Mrs. Smith versus Mr. Smith. This is a school-wide determined, for example, by administration or that goes to the specific policy. The operational details, some of the operational details are left to local school district policymakers, and that it's developed, again, in collaboration with educators and with parents. we have, as I said, kids are in school for a limited portion of their day, and that day, as we found out during the pandemic, when they're not having those social interactions with their friends, not that face-to-face time with their educators, it was a detriment. And so we thank Senator Ricciardi for bringing this legislation forward. And as you deliberate about the bill, we're also willing to assist in any way we can. I do have some written testimony, which I will hand in.
Questions? Senator Sullivan.
So I'm still stuck on the classroom control that teachers have. Also, there's a local control issue here, so I'm struggling with that piece of it too. The state telling the school boards what they have to do. But teachers should have control of their classrooms currently.
Yep.
So if a teacher wants to have control of the classroom, does not want cell phones in there, there's nothing prohibiting them from having that policy in their classroom now, correct?
Right, unless there's a school district that has some kind of policy to the contrary.
Right. So
Correct.
how do you foresee that? Sorry, follow up. Sorry. How do you foresee this being implemented in the classroom? There's no fiscal note on this, so storage, that kind of thing isn't included in this. How do you see this being supported in the classroom if it's currently not being supported in the classroom?
I think one difference that would make is, that as I said before, that the policies are clear, that they are consistently applied and uniformly applied school-wide. And because I think once you, some of the House bills were referenced earlier, I think once you start to get into class to class, I think both for the educator and for the students, who are, most of whom do want to follow policies, and for the parents who also want to help their students comply with policies, that makes it more challenging. I think that in and of itself is a major step to when it's not little differences in how it goes from class to class, or I can have it in the hallway but not in the classroom, that sort of thing. And the other thing I would, if I could, Madam Chair, just add to a question that was brought up earlier about safety, and in the event of a situation, school districts should have their emergency response plans updated and communicated to parents, and some of the examination of these policies, and for the small number of folks who have pushed back for this reason, if there is an incident in a school, I would want my child paying attention to the adult in the room who is going to, help them follow the safety plan, and not on their cell. I would want that student to have the best chance of being safe. And I think if you have a well communicated and developed emergency response plan, the best thing to do is to follow that. So, and so I think it can be a distraction in a situation like that. We all know from either social media, texting, or whatever, the rumors can fly around very quickly in an emergency situation. And in some instances, you can even have a situation where, when either law enforcement or safety personnel are trying to address the situation, you have it builds. So you just have an overwhelmed network in a situation like that. The most important thing is to make sure our students and our educators are safe should an incident like that occur. So.
Questions? Okay, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Who do you think, well, let me start from that. You said there are schools that have this policy in place already. Who decided, who made the policy?
Excuse me. That varies, I believe. I don't know if I could give you a complete answer on that. In some cases, it was the principal. In some cases, it was school board. And in some cases, this was sort of a grassroots effort in terms of parents and educators working together. In large part because there has been more research and literature about the effect of social media on schools, and so you know, it's been a little bit of everything, but there are a lot of school districts who have not waited for states to take action, as I mentioned in my earlier testimony, but we think that this would be helpful to sort of set a minimum standard for what schools ought to have here as policy.
Okay, as a representative from the New Hampshire Teachers Union, Mr. Christina said that if you have a law that takes the burden off the teacher of having to enforce this thing, do you see that as a possibility? How would it affect the school districts?
I think it would give them, as I said, a minimum standard and guidance as to what the policy should look like. We have a lot of state laws that do that in other areas for school board policies, and so this wouldn't be the first one. So I think that would be helpful not only for the educators but also for the school boards and the administrators who are trying to implement something that's going to be beneficial. So I think having some of that guidance and as I said, minimum standard would be helpful to them. Because
it's always nice to have some authority behind you.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point because I think it was raised earlier. The implementation of this is so key, and so I think having those standards would be helpful to that. But yes, having your principal, your administrators, be working with clear policies is really important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Anybody else in the audience who would like to add something to this SB 206 on cell phones in the school? If not, thank you very much for coming, and this ends the hearing. Should we go into executive session and look at some of the stuff?
Can you tell us what bills we're going to accept? and
Well, I
then
would just
send it
think,
all-
I was thinking of the David Waters bill, the one that he brought in the amendment for. We're gonna take a look at
59.
going into executive session.
We heard this last week.
Yeah, we heard it at 59. I heard that last week.
Yeah, they're on our desks. It's an amendment
Yeah.
to the transfer of funds.
And the amendment says that there is no direct cost. Which is always nice.
Thank you.
$59.
Brian, do you have a copy of the amendment? Right in front of me? No one was paying attention.
So this is the Senate Bill 59 that he had introduced. And he was telling me there's that there is money in it, and they're going to take $100,000 out of the money that was distributed to foot this 59 for the next 2 years. And so there will be no additional appropriation for this bill.
So do we want to go into exec session to talk about this?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, but did anybody vote?
I didn't hear it. I didn't hear.
Second.
All right, all in
Okay.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so we're in executive session.
Yes,
Senator Ward, just, may I?
yes,
For
absolutely.
just underlying context here, so this is the bill that would take the current program that provides free community, a free community college course to first responders that have been specific to police, to fire and EMS, and include the public safety communicators. So that's the underlying what Senator Waters came in to present to us. So here he's looking to transfer funds and do this as one time.
Apparently there's $2 million that was appropriated for the program, and there's plenty of money left in it. And he was saying that taking 100,000 out of that $2 million to support this with the amendment, so that would leave no money being appropriated for this bill right now,
So
for the next 2 years.
to sum it up, it would save the New Hampshire taxpayers $125,000.
It was saving,
Yes.
right.
So yeah, because
sounds
it's already
great.
out, it's already out, so these funds are already out there, it's just moving it so that we don't have to have anything
not-
additional.
Right.
We wouldn't be appropriating an additional 125. We would.
No, we're not, it's already,
Yeah.
it's just moving, just transfer something that's already exists, yeah. Mhm. Oh, yeah, because it's only 100. It's 100.
100,000.
It's moving less.
I think the original bill made an appropriation where the amendment just transfers. Right. So
Bless you.
Bless you. The only. May I? And I wish it's really to have an opportunity to speak with Senator Waters. So this, even though this, it's transferred, so even though the underlying bill and the statute that already exists is for police, fire, and EMS, and this is an expansion for dispatchers. If I'm reading this correctly, it transfers funds just to police standards and training to their recruitment and retention fund, which would be appropriate. And so is this, remember, I'd love to ask Senator Waters. So originally when this bill was passed, it was funding a community college, say, for credit course, but this was in the language he brought us, it was expanding, so there are non-credit courses like Firefighter One that someone can go to the fire academy and take, and it would, provide support for that. So what I'm just trying to sort out here, is this just for police standards and training for, say, maybe their side of it?
But it's support. It is to support 59. Because
I understand that, but the transfer of funds goes to police standards and training, recruitment and retention, where the work that gets done under this has funds that go, that support college credit level courses at the community college, but also has funding that goes to fire training and EMS and police standards and training, which are two different entities. I mean, look, overall, I support this. I'm just trying to sort out why it's going where, and that's the one question we didn't get to ask.
So my understanding is that the money, the $2 million has already been appropriated to this program. So they have the money, and he was adding the additional ones. And that he had asked for an appropriation, but he has discussed it with this group here. And they have agreed not to have any additional appropriation, but to take a transfer of $100,000 from this fund or account here and put it into the addition to 59, which will leave the program free for the next 2 years.
I'm fine with that. So Senator Ward, I understand that. I think I found it in the hearing report, establishment of a fund. So again, it's going to police standards and training, not to the New Hampshire's, not to the New Hampshire Fire Academy. That's a separate fund, but establishment for the fund, establish of a fund for the extra, and as in with extra costs associated with the police academy, and that's actually the $125 $25,000. So I don't know what those extra costs are, but funding the necessary materials with the police academy. This covers any costs of partaking in the police academy, which was already supposed to be fully paid for by the original recruitment and retention program in its current form. Okay. I got it. I didn't know we were gonna exec this, so I didn't like take a deep dive in. Plus,
Well, it just
we've got the amendment. No, I'm
With
good. I'm
With the
good.
amendment, that but we can get rid of at least one of the.
No, I'm fine with that. So,
So I need to have a vote
I'll
on,
take a
on
mo-
the
I'll
bill,
make a motion
on the bill.
on the underlying bill
Yeah.
for OTP for SB 59.
Second.
We have a,
Fred to say.
and we have a second. All those in favor about to pass on 59?
Would you like me to add the amendment first, and then we'll do the whole package at once?
Yeah, we have the underlying bill, then we do the amendment, okay. Now we have the amendment,
Sure. May I make a motion?
2025, yes.
So I'd like to make a motion to adopt the amendment 2025-0224S that allows for, replaces section 6 and allows for this transfer of funds that already exists.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay.
We have an ought to pass on the amendment, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that's 5-0. Now back to the bill with the amendment. The underlying bill will, with the amendments. All those in favor of the underlying bill with the amendment?
Aye.
I'm in. Aye.
So that's 5-0. Okay,
Move consent?
move to consent.
Second.
All those in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye.
Right, 5-0. Who wants to take it out if it comes?
I'd be happy to take it out.
Okay. Prentice. Okay,
Thank you, Senator Ward.
I think that's one out. Okay, I think that's it. Next, we're gonna do some bills next Tuesday. And I have the, I think we're gonna do next Tuesday, the food, free lunch, breakfast, the 2 bills having to do with that next. And then we'll do some more executing on some of these bills. So take a look at them.
Motion to come out of executive session?
Second.
All those in favor of coming out of the executive session?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We're out of executive session. This is, 59 is done.
Second. What's up, Pete?
Nothing much, just backing up my successor there.
Senator, we still need to adjourn. We still need to adjourn the entire meeting.
The executive session is over and you can adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
We're out.
Another
Thank you,
motion.
Senator Sullivan.